The 12 Supreme Grade swords are the 12 strongest swords in the entire One Piece world. Both people that we know that has wielded one of these weapons have the word strongest in their title. So, where's the rest of them? This is actually something incredibly fun to think about for me. I feel like because Oda put such a specific number on these swords, he has to reveal them eventually. And like I mentioned, the two people that we know that has one of these swords, both are ridiculously strong. So I feel like the people that get revealed that has these swords later are gonna be dumb strong as well. So in this video, I wanted to break down some options of who exactly could have these swords and where these swords could be if we haven't seen them in the story yet. But before we get started, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to get notified. I believe 70% of you who are watching my videos right now are not subscribed to the channel. We're pushing out content almost every day now, so if you notice you've been watching a lot of my videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an upload. Also, if you're having a good time, drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. But let's get back to the swords. With the Supreme Grade swords, we actually currently in the story know 3 of them. One of them belongs to Mihawk. It's called Yoru. It's that big ass gigantic sword that he uses. Another one belonged to Whitebeard, and it's actually not a sword, ironically. It's a naginata called the Murakumogiri. And yeah, that was Whitebeard's main weapon that he used the majority of the time. So those are the only 2 weapons that we know the owners to, but we do know a 3rd Supreme Grade sword, and that is the Shodai Kitetsu. That is the strongest Kitetsu blade, which is a cursed blade. Now what's interesting about this sword is, although it hasn't been confirmed by Oda or in the story, a lot of people believe that Gorosei Gandhi has this sword, because the sword that Gorosei Gandhi has right now fits the Kitetsu profile from top to bottom. The Kitetsu blades have signature patterns on the swords and the hilts, and the sword guards all look the same. And the sword that Gorosei Gandhi has fits the profile perfectly. So although it's not confirmed, it's very likely that Gorosei Gandhi does have the Shodai Kitetsu, and I do feel like that does make sense, the world government having their hands on strong weapons, and the Gorosei in general do feel like they're not just there for show. I don't know what it is about those old guys, but it feels like they could scrap a little. So yeah, at this point, I feel like we could pretty much lock in Gorosei Gandhi as the 3rd wielder, but besides that, there's still 9 swords missing, and that's a good amount of swords. You might even be thinking like, are there even that many strong swordsmen in the story of One Piece? And going down the list, there are actually a good amount of them, so let's start with some candidates that I think are pretty much locks for having a Supreme Grade sword. And the first candidate is the Pirate King himself, Gol D. Roger. Now this one I think makes perfect sense. He was one of the strongest pirates of all time, the Pirate King himself. A man of his caliber definitely should have a weapon of that grade. Plus he was adventuring so much, it would make sense that he got his hands on a Supreme Grade sword. We have also seen him in the story as a swordsman using the sword as a primary weapon. So I do feel like it's very clear that Roger was a swordsman and used the sword a lot. And yeah, with like Whitebeard having one, I do feel like it makes sense Roger had one as well. Now as far as where that sword is right now, it could be in a variety of places. Maybe he handed it off to Rayleigh or some other Roger pirate for a keepsake. A fun idea could be that he left it at Laugh Tale and now it's with the One Piece, and maybe that's a sword that Zoro eventually inherits. It could also just be hidden elsewhere like the Oro Jackson. We still don't know where that is, but overall I do feel like Roger definitely had his hands on one of the Supreme Grade swords. Speaking of Roger, I feel like it would be fitting that Rayleigh also had one of these swords. Rayleigh is another person we've seen throughout the story with a sword, of course clashing against Kizaru and Sabaody, but also in the Oden flashback as well. So it does seem like Rayleigh's primary way of fighting is as a swordsman. Now what's interesting is that during the Oden flashback and during his clash with Kizaru, he had 2 different swords. So which one was the Supreme Grade swords, or was it neither of them? Honestly, it could be any of those options. I could totally see a prime Rayleigh having the sword, and now that he's retired, he kind of uses a older busted up sword. Or maybe he didn't find the Supreme Grade sword until later and that's what he's using in Sabaody. Or maybe it's just a completely different sword altogether that we have not seen. But overall, I do feel like being the caliber of a fighter that Rayleigh is, plus all the adventures he went on with Roger, I feel like him having a Supreme Grade sword makes sense. So with Rayleigh, I'm also pretty confident to lock him in as another person with a Supreme Grade. The next person I also think has a Supreme Grade sword is Shanks. Now Shanks' sword we actually know the name of, it's called Griffin. The name itself is based off the mythical creature Griffin, which is very fitting for Shanks, and design wise is not too crazy looking, but it's pretty cool. I I guess. But with Shanks, it all comes down to his skill and the level he's at. He is also a swordsman in my opinion. He's used a sword throughout the story, clashing with Whitebeard and Akainu. He's had legendary clashes with Mihawk as well. I know some people don't like to label Shanks a swordsman because it goes into a power scaling argument, but at the very least you gotta admit the guy uses his sword a lot and has it with him all the time. And the fact that Oda gave it a name as well, I feel like eventually it will be revealed that that sword is a supreme grade sword. So for Shanks, I'm also pretty confident that he also has a supreme grade. Now I know some of you might be saying, why are you so confident in saying all these people have supreme grades? Well, like, I could be wrong, but there's 9 swords left in the story to reveal, and I feel like they have to go to some people that we know already. And another person who's like that is Shiryu, who has his own sword, Ryu. Might have pronounced that wrong. If I did, my bad. But this sword is absolutely badass. I love the design of this sword. The colors of it and the patterns on the sword and the hilt and the sheath. You could definitely tell Oda spent some time designing this sword, which is why I think it is a supreme grade sword. First off, Shiryu was the ex-head jailer of Impel Down, which I feel like if you reach that level, maybe they like hook you up with a supreme grade sword. But also, like, his role in the story is pretty big. A lot of people think he's gonna be a Zoro opponent in the future. People have been speculating he might have ties to Wano as well. So yeah, Shiryu is definitely one of the more notable swordsmen in the story. He'll definitely get more shine in the future as well. I feel like we might delve into his backstory a little too. And as a potential endgame Zoro opponent, I feel like it would make sense if he also has a supreme grade sword. And then there's one last guy I'm a little unsure of, but just because of how hyped up he is, I'm gonna say he also has one, and that is Rox D. Xebec. Now with Rox, we literally don't even know what he looked like, but when Sengoku was talking about the fight of Garp and Roger versus the Rox Pirates, we do see Rox in the background holding a sword. Now is that enough to say the man was a swordsman? No, but that is all we have to go off of, and if you're Rox D. Xebec and you're wielding a sword, you definitely want the best sword you can get. This man had the most stacked crew of all time. There was no way he was walking around with like Yubashiri. Plus again, I do feel like once you reach that high caliber like Roger and Whitebeard, you're gonna have a high grade weapon. Now as far as where this sword is now, there's a couple of options. First off, maybe it's sunk beneath the sea with God Valley, wherever that went. Or maybe somebody else picked it up like Kaido and he gave it to somebody else. It's also possible that Rox is still alive and that he's Emu and he shows off this sword later. The possibilities are endless, but overall I am gonna go out on a whim and say Rox D. Xebec also had a supreme grade sword. But even after all those people, that only brings our total to 8. That means there's still 4 swords left. So that gets us to the maybe category of people that could possibly have one, but I'm not as confident. And the first person in terms of caliber of strength, I definitely feel like should have this sword, but the sword that she has is kind of weird, and that is Big Mom. Now Big Mom of course has Napoleon that turns into a hat and also turns into a sword, so honestly I'm not really sure if it's actually a sword or not. But with how Big Mom's powers work, like how you're able to create somebody like Prometheus is essentially taking a big fire and putting a homie into it, and essentially you got a son. Or you could take a giant wave, put some soul into it, and now it's a giant homie. So I definitely do think it's possible that Napoleon was actually a supreme grade blade that Big Mom put her own soul into. After all, very few things have Big Mom's own soul in them, so I don't feel like she would just kind of waste it on a hat or a normal sword. So with Big Mom, I actually do feel like it's very possible she does have her hands on a supreme grade blade. Maybe later on in this fight people ignore her a little too much and she finally reveals that information, or it could be just Napoleon being a really weird hat or something like that. Because there's some other options as well, and one of them is Fujitora. And Fujitora is another person in terms of strength that would definitely make sense, and he does use his sword a good amount. It's not just there for show. When he fought against Zoro, he used it. When he fought against Sabo, he also used it. So clearly using the sword is part of his fighting style. The only thing is that that sword is so basic. Like, I'm not trying to bash on the sword because it's kind of similar to Brook's sword, but it's like one of the most basic swords within the story, but at the same time it kind of fits Fujitora. The guy's blind, so it really doesn't matter what the sword looks like. So maybe like after he became an admiral, they were like, here, we have the supreme grade, how would you like it designed or used or something like that? And he was just like, just give me the blade and stick it in this little wooden thing and I'll use it like that. So honestly, Fujitora, definitely another very possible option. Another person I think is very possible is a person that I've really been closely tied to recently, and that of course is Vista of the Whitebeard Pirates. Now Vista being really the top tier swordsman of the Whitebeard Pirates, I initially thought it would make sense that he would have one of these swords. The problem is the guy uses 2 swords, and I feel like if he had 2 supreme grades, it would be a little overkill. After all, there's only 12 of these in the world, so having 2 of them is pretty OP. But yeah, Vista is another very notable swordsman within the story of One Piece. Definitely the top tier swordsman of the Whitebeard Pirates, even leads his own division of swordsmen as well. And I do feel like he will return to the story in the future, I'm hoping in Wano. But yeah, for Vista, I probably would say that his swords are more likely great grade swords, because having 2 supreme grades is a little OP. And for that same reason, I also don't think Shiki has supreme grade swords. Shiki is another top tier pirate within the old age. He used to go head to head with Roger, fought against Garp and Sengoku in a 2v1. I mean, he lost, but the guy's a mad lad. And he also had very high ambitions, so I do feel like him having 2 supreme grades would maybe make more sense than Vista. Now his 2 swords are called the Oto and the Kogarashi, which are now his legs. These 2 swords do look pretty cool, and the fact that he's using them as legs now is even more interesting. But again, having 2 supreme grades is a little broken. I also don't know when this man would return to the story, if ever. He might have had some connection to Kurozumi Higurashi, so we'll see if he makes an appearance in Wano, I guess. But yeah, with Shiki, I probably lean towards him having great grade swords. But yeah, besides those guys, everybody else I really don't see having supreme grade swords. The only other like really maybe option is King. King does have a pretty unique sword, and him being like the top commander of Kaido's crew and Kaido not being a swordsman, maybe he got like a hand-me-down essentially. It's possible maybe Kaido took Rox's sword and gave it to King as well. But at the very least, we are seeing King starting to use his sword, and I do think he's gonna use it a lot more when he gets serious. Is that sword really gonna be supreme grade though? I'm really hesitant to say yes. So really with the last 4 slots, I think probably maybe 2 of them are like the maybe options that we mentioned. That's why I'm really hesitant to say it's Shiki or Vista. But yeah, besides those guys, it's definitely possible it comes from people that we haven't seen in the story yet. Green Bull, of course, we haven't seen how his powers work. We know he has probably some sort of devil fruit, but he could be maybe using a sword as well, just like Fujitora. Now that I think about it, Dragon, we don't really know how he fights either. Maybe he also has a sword. But another idea that I like is just the world government having some of these swords. Obviously, they like to hoard power. They like to have strong stuff to themselves. So I feel like any chance they get to get their hands on these swords, they are definitely taking it. Maybe they even got Roger's sword and Roger just didn't care and gave it to him. But yeah, overall, those are my thoughts on the supreme grade swords and who could possibly have one. I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts on who you think have these swords and where these swords could be. So let me know in the comments below. But as always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please hit that like button. To keep up with the channel, you gotta hit that subscribe button, hit the bell to get notified. Thank you to all my King Pirates Elite members on YouTube and Patreon for supporting the channel. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Twitch at I'm Xebec, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.